Calling this meeting of the Public Services Committee, Tuesday, January 14th, 2014, to order at 5:14. The first thing on our agenda today will be the vehicle for hire ordinance review, and we will start with Jim David giving us an overview of where we're at now.
Question, Mr. Chair. Minutes and approval of such?
Minutes
No?
were not listed on the agenda, so we will handle them at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Good question.
Good afternoon, committee. Jim David, City Council staff. If you do recall, last month this committee worked in a working session and went through Chapter 124, which is the Vehicle for Hire Ordinance, word by word, line by line, and came up with a few changes, some more changes than what had been brought forward before. And I'm just going to highlight some of these along with other changes that staff had recommended. The first one is in the definition of a passenger service vehicle. This is the vehicle for hire that does not have any distinguishing markings on it, does not actually solicit passengers in front of businesses or on street corners and things of that nature. But an additional line was added, and by appointment, to accompany the rest of the definition of a passenger service vehicle. In .030 and .066, a word was added, suspension, to accompany revocation to give additional options to the licensing specialist. This came about because of discussions amongst the committee members on what is available to the city if they have an individual who or a company or an individual who is under investigation, has violated a local, state, or federal law or rule or regulation. What is in their toolkit to deal with that company or with that driver? The ordinance language was actually taken from the daycare license ordinance, and you'll see here that the suspension is 90 days with a 1-year maximum, and then there's also the right of appeal that is provided to both the business and the driver. Another part of the discussion was the surcharge. The committee had decided that the surcharge should be removed from the ordinance, but did inquire about Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This was an emergency surcharge, and it allows for a increase allows for a surcharge to accompany the regular fare if gas reaches a certain price level. And in Chapel Hill, it was $4.50. Once it surpasses that amount, it can increase 50 cents. And also note, too, that it has to have 7 days that the price of gas averages that price. The question also was on North Carolina or Chapel Hill, what do they charge? It was interesting to find that in their central business district, Chapel Hill actually has a flat fee of $6 to $8. Their central business district and their accompanying university campus is about 1.5 miles. And the town council was approached by a student body president who requested not only a simpler fees, but also Chapel Hill did not regulate taxi cabs and not license taxi cabs. So about a year ago, they actually started the process. They have a total of 45 taxi cab companies that operate in Chapel Hill, and Chapel Hill is about 60 to 70,000 people. You'll see here that the outside of that central core, that it's $2.50 for the first mile, $2.50 each additional mile. They do have a $5 minimum, and then for each passenger, more than 2 passengers, is $2 per person. Just kind of going back on what ordinance currently states in Sioux Falls, the maximum, and I'll repeat, the maximum that a taxi cab company can charge for the first mile is $5.75, $3.15 for each additional mile. And the total cost here at the very end, $30 to $5.50, is for 10 miles, but that does include the fuel surcharge of $1.40. Another part of the discussion during the working session was licensing fees. And I'll just put this out here. This is just kind of looking at the region, looking at what other municipalities in the upper Midwest charge taxi companies, but also the driver's license. Sioux Falls is at $85, but in Rochester is at $18 at the low end. At the high end is both Lincoln and Omaha at about $654 and $660 total. Another part of some of the additions that staff is recommending had to do with some cleanup language in 124.062. Basically what happened is that we removed number 10, and this simply reads, who has had their driver's license canceled, suspended, or revoked within 1 year of application must have a valid driver's license within the last year of date of application. I'm actually going to ask one of our assistant city attorneys or assistant police chief Patty Lyon or Keith Allenstein to come forward just to kind of discuss this in greater detail.
Keith Allenstein, City Attorney's Office. The first thing that we did was just to clean up some of the language. It was just so that each section kind of mirrored the other, and also to clarify that the time period for these disqualifications begins when you're discharged from, before it just said convicted or discharged, and that's to include if you're on probation, parole, prison, or jail. So we cleaned up some of that language just to clarify and make it consistent throughout. The other thing that we did was, as Mr. David said, was to remove the additional disability if you've had your license suspended. I contacted the Department of Public Safety, got a list of all the different ways that a license can be canceled, revoked, suspended. There were a number of reasons that can happen that are not really related to driving. If you get a civil judgment against you and that person files that judgment with the Department of Motor Vehicles, your license can be suspended. Your license can be suspended for failure to pay child support. There's a whole host of different reasons, and rather than trying to list out, well, these ones count and these don't, we also looked at the fact that the Department of Public Safety is already suspending a person's operator's license for basically, or by statute the court is, basically for a minimum of 30 days for almost any violation, that would suffice, and there didn't need to be any further disability on a person's eligibility to get a vehicle for hire license. So basically what we've done here is that when a person gets their driver's license back, then they are at least potentially eligible to apply for a vehicle for hire license as well. And the last thing that we did was, it occurred to me that, and you see this in other sections in statute, that we should include, if we are able to access the information anyway, convictions from other states. Ours just read convictions for these things. I just wanted to clarify then in section B that if you have what would otherwise be a qualifying conviction that may affect your eligibility, but it's out of state, that would also be something that we could take into consideration.
Do we have any questions? Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Staff is also recommending the following changes to .003 and .029. We clarified that in the language that this is a one-time annual inspection. We also replaced vehicle for hire with applicant, since technically they are not a vehicle for hire when they're applying for a license. And then we added the suspension language to those sections. In 124.028, we also added vehicle identification number, the VIN number, into that section, and also created some additional discretion for the city. I'll just conclude my remarks by saying that the committee, there's a few things that staff is requesting. Any additional changes to the ordinance? Does there need to be an emergency surcharge added into the ordinance? Does a licensing fee need to change? And also, do we need to have certain sections have an effective date to give the administration some time to plan with some of these additional regulations that will be added to the ordinance? So those are just some of the topics I'll leave you with, and of course, staff is here for any questions you may have.
Why don't you leave that screen up right now, Jim?
Yep.
Questions for Jim from Councilman Karski?
Go back to that screen on the inspections, if you can.
Okay.
And just, maybe it's the way I'm reading it, but it says a one-time annual inspection. Is it one time or is it annual?
A one-time inspection that happens annually, so.
Okay.
It's an annual inspection, I'm sorry.
You're getting an annual
Yep,
inspection?
Yep,
Okay.
an annual inspection.
Okay.
And that doesn't read that way in the ordinance, that's just
And
in
that's
the
where I was
presentation.
looking through that part, and I was trying to, ascertain what it said.
the,
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Any other questions? Councilman Offenbach?
Thank you. Jim, just walk us through, we've made so many changes. Do we have the 24/7,
Yep. The 24/7 should still be in there.
where would that be?
Let me find it. Yep, .006, letter C.
So that, if I could then with my colleagues, we talked about that from both sides during our work session, that number one, the change that we made in the definition of a passenger service vehicle, it's on the third page of the handout we have right now, by making sure that there is that option to drive passengers around on an appointment basis, that the one side of this argument is that then makes it okay to tell a taxi cab company, if you're not a passenger service vehicle, you are truly a taxi company, that you have to be 24/7. A taxi company has to be 24/7 because you have the option of being a passenger service vehicle that could work by appointment. Do we agree with that still as a group? Is that our conversation, or do we want to take the 24/7 out?
Councilman Karski?
I personally have a problem with it. I think we're putting a lot of stipulations and making, if you're going to run a taxi cab company, taximeters, permanent markings, inspections, etc., that, you would think you'd want to run it as much as you could. And if it's 12 hours a day or 18 hours a day or 24 hours a day, that should be up to that business owner to decide. It's their investment. And if they don't want to run it 24 hours a day, I guess we don't tell too many businesses that they have to run 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Our buses don't run 24 hours a day.
Which would be an argument for making the taxis run 24/7, but that's...
Councilor
guess-
Aguilar? You have-
I guess that after hearing the discussion, that I would have to agree with Counselor Karski. I guess that I'm not certain the real need for all taxi companies, since we have so many to run 24 hours each day, 7 days a week.
Councilor Offenbach?
Mr. Chair, I would not disagree with that. I have more important things in this ordinance, things that are more important to me than the 24/7. I would be willing to, and now I've lost it again, but I'd be willing to take that out.
Do we want to take that out at this time, or do we want to leave that in as a further discussion point as this moves forward?
If I might, Mr. Chair, I think it gets muddled. It's one of those things that people keep grabbing onto, and as I just said, to me, it's a very minor part of the reason we're going through this. To me, there are things that are far more important than that I would rather have people get caught on, that the 24/7 thing muddles the argument, and I prefer personally for it to go away now.
And if somebody wants to bring it up, if this goes before the entire council, I'm sorry
They
if I
can.
may, if they want to add it,
Right.
they can always add it in.
Yep.
Councilor Aguilar?
Well, but we then need to discuss that last sentence in C. The business shall have a listed telephone number.
Oh, see.
Listed where?
Right, I thought that was gone.
I
'Cause
did
that
too.
didn't make sense.
So that can be something else, I think, that can be struck. Just to, for conversation, one of the other options that we had for qualifications of a taxi company that we never did bring in, I think that Jim had researched, was the number of vehicles. There was, in some cities, they set the number of vehicles from 2 to 5 to be a taxi company. That, that could be part of a further discussion if we did still want to look at, those qualifications. But as Councilor Urfenbach said, I'm not dead set on trying to fight for this. I think that we've made a lot of changes here, and I don't feel that's something that is necessary. I think that the cab companies will determine when they want to operate, and it's just not something I'm going to hold on to until, the very end. I think that's just something as part of a discussion, and it can end right here if we'd like to remove that.
Well, that's my question then, do we need a motion to do it, or we've been working by consensus on this all along? Do we want to just by consensus say we're taking out item C under 124.006?
I think since we're in committee, I would like to see a motion, please.
I would make the motion then that we remove the entire item C out of 124.006, qualification for taxi cab business.
Second, Aguilar.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes 4-0. So we'll remove section C. Do we have any other questions as far as what Councilor Urfenbach?
Yes, you were beginning to allude to it, Mr. Chair, that one of the qualifications for being a taxi cab business, and I don't know that it belongs right in that area, 124.006, but at some point, somewhere in this, we have to add wording, and I don't have the exact wording, we need to talk about it, but we have to add wording that these businesses are truly businesses in good standing with the state of South Dakota, not only with their sales tax licensing, but with their employee relations, that they're doing all their federal income tax, all of those kinds of things that make them a business in good standing with, whatever agencies we want that to be. That needs to be part of being a taxi cab business or being a vehicle for hire.
I think we already did do some changes.
Do we have that
of the
somewhere?
wording on that.
I think, Councilor Urfenbach, you're looking at the front end of the application process. Right now, if you look in .029C, we talk about that the applicant is in compliance with city ordinance. What we could do is say city ordinance, state and federal law.
Which section are we in?
24?
029.
Where?
124.029 issuance.
Well, I guess to continue on this, if you look under revocation, I think we may have that covered.
Yep.
Under section A of 124.030.
Yep. It depends on where you're at in the process. If you're looking at somebody who's applying to be a taxi cab, you would look at .029 when it's issued the license. But Councilor Anderson is completely correct. The language is in place right now that allows for suspension or revocation for a business or an individual driver who is not in compliance with state law, federal law, rule, regulation, city ordinance.
Right, if you might, Mr. Chair. .029 then I think the application process needs to be much more stringent, that they really do need to, and I'd like to see more language. I mean, that idea that there have to be specific, and for me it is the Department of Revenue in terms of sales tax, it's the Department of whoever in terms of, employee income tax, or if they have contractors, how do you deal with that? I want to see very specific language about how that business is operating, because I want us to be able to enforce this. If they're not a good business, I don't want to be licensing them.
Councilor Aguilar?
I would agree with what Counselor Erpenbach is saying. I think it has to be in both sections because I don't think we should be even issuing a license to a company that is not in good state, in a good position with the state or federal law.
I agree. Counselor Karski?
I'll concur with what you're saying. I don't know if you can nail them all down, each one individually, but I agree with what you're saying there. But I do have a concern about the 124030 about the suspension and revocation. And maybe this is a question for our attorney, Mr. Allenstein. Do we need to address an appeals process in here? I mean, any time we take away somebody's livelihood, do they have a right to appeal that? Should that be addressed in the ordinance some way, somehow?
It does indicate that you're able to appeal that, and I thought that the section also refers back to it'd be just the general administrative appeal. So any administrative decision that's made in the city is handled through administrative appeal, whether it be a vicious dog, a suspension, revocation. It's the same, and it works the same way in the daycare licensing. If there's a suspension, revocation, you can appeal either one of those. If there's a suspension, and for whatever reason the ordinance in the daycare ordinances, which is what we've mirrored here, allows you to extend that suspension, you have a right to appeal the extension. That should all be covered in that language.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be specifically referenced? It's just by...
Well, in subsection A, at the very last sentence of that section talks about that the licensee may appeal through the procedures established. We could probably, I'd have to look at the entire language, see if we need to add that again to subsection B, but I think it covers.
Okay, so you're telling me it's okay?
Yeah, I can look at the language again specifically here in, just make sure, but that was my understanding in the way that it was drafted, was that the administrative appeal process would apply. Subsection B really just further explains the suspension process. It also talks about how you can appeal that. There is some redundant language there, but subsection A talks about that you can suspend or revoke, and that is you are able to appeal that through administrative appeals. And then subsection B clarifies what the initial maximum time is for suspension, that you can extend that under certain circumstances, so on and so forth.
Okay.
Any other questions or statements on Councilor Erfenbach?
Question about enforcement then. I mean, there's no teeth in the existing ordinance. And we've heard some concerns about specific businesses over a period of time, and we can't do anything about it. Doesn't matter. We give them the license. And it doesn't matter if they're driving safely, if they have inspected their cars, if they pay their people. It doesn't matter because they get their license anyway. We have no teeth in the current ordinance. Where specifically, and let's talk amongst ourselves, and if Jim would help us, where's the teeth in this ordinance? Are we going to go after these folks? Are we really going to be able to suspend or revoke licenses? Where's the teeth?
Any other? I can comment on that if you don't mind. I have already had a conversation with the mayor on that. The administration is taking a look at specific departments using their code enforcement personnel. I have thought all along that the best place to have this personnel would be under our licensing department. And I still believe that if we pushed for maybe 2 part-time personnel to work a rotating schedule year-round, that our licensing department would have the personnel to be able to go out to these businesses and check that paperwork. But that's something I think needs to be discussed as a full council and with the mayor also. But that's a couple of the ideals that are floating around out there right now. Councilor Erfenbach?
But without that.
Well, let's be serious. All the work that we've done over 1 year to me is worthless if we have no enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that is something that as a council, I think that we need to express to the administration and the mayor that this is something where we need to have enforcement, whether it's done through multiple departments or if it's just done through the licensing department, we need to have enforcement.
But does
Councilor
that
Aguilar.
need to be put in ordinance itself? As far as who is responsible for enforcement?
And I think that would be something as we discuss further, because right now, as a committee, we can make suggestions. But until, the council actually supports and backs an ideal, what actually are we going to put into the ordinance? I can see saying, yes, that the city attorney or the police department is going to enforce this, or the licensing department, but until we can actually finance personnel. Councilman Karski.
We see it frequently where the state legislature will tell the city, you have to do this, and they don't fund it, but they tell us we have to do it. For us to put it in our ordinance to say that this code will be enforced by, or this part will be enforced by this or that, at least it would be a good start towards getting that person put there. And even though if we say that, enforcement will be handled by this department, if they lack staffing to do it, well, now we can talk about it at budget time about putting it in there to, fund that position. But I think we do need to include it in our package to the entire council that enforcement should be handled by this department.
Councilor Offenbach?
The other side of that coin then, sorry, I'm arguing both sides, but the other side of that is, we are the policy-making body, right? I mean, yes, we're the appropriating body as well, but we're setting policy that this is what we expect to have happen. We don't, in the beginning of time, the city council didn't say, it will be the street department that builds the streets that do the blah, blah, there aren't details like that written in ordinance. The administration is the one that has to set it up so that it works, so that the policy works. Certainly it's up to us to push that and make sure that it happens, but I don't know that we have to say specifically it's going to be so-and-so in this office, in that office. You look at each administration mixes things up as it is. How much of that do we have to, how detailed do we have to be?
Councilor Aguilar?
I would agree with what Councilor Erpenbach is saying, but I'm wondering whether we could put it more generally as far as enforcement itself, as far as personnel being allocated to do the code enforcement. I don't know how it is in our policies right now, whether that happens, like when you're talking about the other personnel that, do go out and check to see that the letter of the law is being followed by those that take out permits and whatever. And I don't know how it is as far as how stings, alcohol stings were originally. Are those in ordinance? Or how was that policy set? Was that set by the department, or did it come before the council? And I guess I look towards city attorney and our assistant police chief to further educate us.
I think we could also look at our code enforcement and how that was set up also.
Right.
To determine personnel.
Changed in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yes. But it was changed through the administration. So.
Patty Lyon, Assistant Police Chief, and I'm sorry, Councilor Aguilar, could you repeat what the question is?
Well, basically, when we're discussing enforcement and whether something needs to be put into this ordinance as far as enforcement, I'd kind of like to have some information of how it's done, say with the alcohol stings. Was that an administrative decision, or did it have to go before the council to put in ordinance, or?
Well, I know our department has a policy on how we're going to conduct, like the alcohol stings or the follow-up with the businesses, but I don't, obviously, we have authority through the state and
State
through
law.
the ordinance, to do that. But I don't know if they have I'm not familiar if we have an actual state code, other than saying that you can't sell alcohol to minors. So as a law enforcement officer, we're able to go and conduct
Undercover.
and, to do that, just like any violations of law.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I don't think it says in our ordinance that law enforcement officers, it doesn't lay out that we will write speeding tickets. There's an ordinance saying that you can't speed. And we do the follow-up with that.
Councilor Karski?
So applying that, that concept then to this ordinance, and we have a part that says that you have to have a permanently mounted taximeter installed. And if that taximeter is not installed or has been tampered with, the seal broken, who at that point pulls the license of that taxi company?
Right.
And that has been the original issue too, that we did see when we started this, is that, the enforcement part was going to be a major challenge. I still feel that this is something that, as we move this ordinance forward, that we work with the administration to make sure that the enforcement end is taken care of. Because it seems to me like that should be more internal policy set by whatever department is going to end up being responsible for the enforcement, whether it's the police department, our licensing department, our code enforcement. I mean, all of them have been mentioned, but we haven't focused. We were focusing more on the rules, and then the enforcement would come after that, is what I saw of this. So I feel that now is the perfect time to finish these rules and then work with the administration, the city attorney's office, the mayor's office, to determine where we're going to do the enforcement. And that discussion would happen at a city council level.
Okay. Let me take it one step further then. I hire a taxi cab and I want to go from my home to the airport, and our ordinance says by the most direct route. And I end up taking 50% further than I should have taken just because of the way I was taken for whatever reason. Who do I call?
And once again, that's the reason why we're here today. That's the reason why we've been working on this for over a year. And right now, I would say you would call your licensing department. They issue the licenses. It's until this ordinance is passed saying the most direct method, there is no law being broken. So, unless it was in the previous ordinance. Jim, can you answer that?
I was just going to say that in ordinance right now, and this is kind of a different approach, I think Councilor Erpenbach picked up that there's a lot of flexibility in this ordinance. It doesn't list a specific department. It says the city, and that gives the administration a lot of their own discretion how they want to enforce this. In the REMSA ordinance, it actually requires that an annual update be provided to the city council. Maybe that's a different approach where the city council puts in here a requirement that an annual update has to occur on number of taxi cabs, inspections done, things of that nature. A detailed report that, in a certain sense, will show that the council continues to monitor the situation and determine whether or not amendments need to be made to the current ordinance. So it's just a different approach.
Councilman Karski.
Well, several times a month, Jamie Palmer's before us with alcohol licenses, renewals, that type of thing. I mean, just updates and whatever. Would that be the type of thing we'd be looking at, or more frequently than annually, or
one time annually or whatever it was before? It could be an informational. Does it have to be anything formal? I think that's what happens with REMSA, where they come forward, they provide their statistics to the council at an informational meeting. No official action needs to be taken. But at that informational meeting, it might precipitate, well, the Public Services Committee needs to take a look at this section or that section. So
Councilor Offenbach?
And again, I don't have the wording, but I would like, this report is a good idea. I would like to see us write it in so that we do, in the first year of this ordinance being active, we hear a report twice in the first year, and then annually after that, and as requested by the council. Is that okay? Have him do that wording?
And remember, any public services, since we are overseeing this, any public services committee member can bring it up to be reviewed by the Public Services Committee also. Mm-hmm. So we do have those avenues of review.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Chair,
Aguilar?
do we need to put an effective date in the ordinance itself? Because there are things that are going to have to be handled by the administration and by the companies themselves in order to have this fully enacted. So 20 days or whatever after, it's passed by the council does not give them the time to be able to do it.
Councilor Offenbach?
I'm comfortable with 6 months. Is that too far? 6 months from the date of the vote, whatever that ends up being.
I don't see.
Does Jim have any suggestion?
I was just going to say that the new year for taxi cab licensing begins on February 1st. So that's another part of this, is that Jamie's going to be reviewing a lot of these applications February 1. Right now, so that's the other part of this.
Councilor Offenbach?
Well, we acknowledge that there's going to be some flux, right? I mean, there's going to be 6 months but she's, in 6 months from now, I mean, if we approved this it's going to be the middle of March before we're approving this, right? 6 months from then, so that she's looking at renewals, the renewals in the beginning of 2015 is when she'll really start making sure this stuff is happening. Yes?
Councilor Aguilar?
Can we have effective dates for different parts of it, though, like the federal government does? Where certain parts of it become effective at different dates, so that some of this, I don't know. I think that some of this stuff from some of the testimony we've received, to wait a full year is really putting the public in the same position, and we feel that in many cases there is, immediate changes that need to be made that aren't as difficult to enact, maybe. I don't know.
Jim, what is the normal timeline when we pass something? Is it 30 days, 2 weeks?
I would have to defer to our assistant city clerk on that.
The ordinance is effective 20 days after the publication date, and the publication date is the Saturday after the meeting. So this would be the Saturday after the second reading. It would be that'd be published, and then 20 days after that it'd be effective.
Jamie, can you come forward, please?
Jamie Palmer with licensing.
I guess the question is, what are the difficulties of enforcing this or instituting this if we pass it in March and maybe say in 60 days after it's passed that ordinance would be in effect?
Right off the top of my head, I've gotten a bunch of renewals right now. In fact, I've gotten the majority of the taxi cab. The others are kind of trickling in, and I'm issuing the tags. Now, because it isn't an ordinance right now, the certified mechanic, we don't specify that it's certified mechanic. So, depending on how fast this goes forward, many of those aren't going to have been inspected by a certified mechanic. So does that mean they would have to get another inspection?
Well, my question is, do they have to, does the certified mechanic inspection have to happen at the same time they're licensing? I would
Not
think those
according to-
inspections could happen any time of the year, and we'd space them out with the different companies, so we wouldn't put any,
They do. Currently, we just require it at
That
renewal
time?
time. So that's, all of them are turning them in right now. So,
so right now, no matter what, as fast as we can put this through, we are going to miss this licensing period.
yes.
Okay. Thank
The
you.
only thing it would impact is new, or if they were to get revoked for, let's say, non-payment of insurance, and then they'd have to reapply, then they would fall under the new ordinance if approved.
Thank you. Councilor Aguilar.
So can we, have enactment of different parts of the ordinance at different points? I would ask the Assistant City Attorney.
That's a very good question. I know that it's done at the federal level, it's not the state level. I don't know of any specifics that say we can't, but I don't know the specific answer that we can.
Can we look into that? Because I think that by level of difficulty, we could get some of this enacted almost, the 20 days after it's been, in the legal vehicle or whatever, that in the newspaper. And I think that we could look at that and take that to the council too when we bring it forward to them. So can you research that for us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other, Councilor Offenbach?
Licensing fees. If Jim would return to that chart. We're talking, you've talked about 2 part-time positions, or whatever, however we're going to do this.
Correct.
It's going to cost money. And I'm sorry, but it's really easy, really cheap to be a taxi driver, to be a taxi company inside the city of Sioux Falls. It's really easy, and I think that those folks need to have more skin in the game. That if we're serious about enforcing this, if we're serious about licensing and taking on this responsibility to a greater depth, we need to be ready to pay for it. And this is one way to do it. I think on that chart, some of those numbers are pretty high. I don't agree with those for us, but I think that we need to build in rates that actually cover our costs, because I'm sure this isn't covering even Jamie's time at this point, these current numbers.
Councilor Karski.
Do you mind just standing up, Jim? I'm going across those fees there, and the driver's license. So that's how is that charged? That $35 fee, is that based for every driver that as a taxi cab?
Yes, from my understanding, that is from the police department. They handle the chauffeur's license, the driver's license. So it's $35 per driver, and I believe that covers the background check.
Okay, so if I have 10 drivers, it's $350. Okay, right?
And then the next one is the per vehicle fee. This comes out of Jamie's office, and this is $50 or $25. Excuse me, it's been a while since I've looked at this one. It's $50, and then the additional vehicle is $25 per vehicle. So the larger your company, the more burdensome that fee is going to be. Sioux Falls does not have a overall company license fee as some of the others, such as Des Moines has. And that's pretty much it for Sioux Falls.
Councilor Aguilar.
So are you saying that in St. Paul, it's $400 per vehicle?
Yep.
And with the driver's license that's issued, the chauffeur's license, is that usually paid by the individual or the company?
Some are handled by the driver themselves and some is handled by the company. I know that it's an individual driver's license, so it depends on what company they're working for. If it's an owner-operator, they have to get the license to have the business, and then they also have to have the drivers.
But they could use that license for any, as long as they have the chauffeur's license. Does it specify the company they're working for, or could they utilize it, move from one company to another, or how does that work?
The driver's license is issued for 1 year, and I believe that they would be able to transfer that to another company.
Okay,
I don't
thank
know
you.
why they wouldn't be able to.
Councilor Karski.
So is that driver's license fee? So if I have 10 drivers, I have to have all 10 of them go back every year?
Correct.
Okay, okay.
Ideals, comments?
I don't, if I may, see a problem with our fee schedule, quite frankly. I'm looking at this, I don't know why would need to have a company fee, and our per vehicle fee seems in line for the first vehicle anyway. Our driver's license fees are in line. It's when we get to the end, there's a lot of state fees that other municipalities are rolling into their $500 state fee for Lincoln, $100 state fee for Lincoln, Omaha, again, 5 and 100. So, I mean, those aren't being charged by the cities, they're being charged by the state. So, as far as the municipality goes, I don't think we need to throw anything more on there.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Offenbach.
But our state does nothing in terms of regulating taxi cabs, and Nebraska does. They're very strict in Nebraska about that's why there are those exorbitant fees for the state. I think that, again, I would go back to the argument that we need to recover some of our costs. If we're really going to do the enforcement we're talking about, we need to, and I think the company fee might be the best place to do that. That it's really about recouping costs. It's, and it's not out of line to charge $100 or a couple $100 and that's not going to cover our costs anyway.
Not even going to come close.
And normally, the fees that we charge for those services never do cover them, that I've seen on some of the other things that we charge fees on. So I guess I do agree with Councilor Offenbach, if we were to raise the final cost for a company, that it would be under the company fee, where I would think would be the best place. If we raise the per vehicle fee, I think that would be a major detriment to the larger companies that have established themselves. Maybe a small bump in the driver's license fee for the services that the police department have to do as far as inspections, but otherwise, that's about the only two places I see it. Councilor Aguilar.
I don't recall if we were ever given this information, but Rochester, Minnesota seems to be so out of line with the rest that we're looking at. How many taxi cab companies do they have? And do we have any more information as to why they are so out of the regional average?
Councilor Aguilar, I did ask that question because Rochester was so far on the low side. This is what they have for regulations in Rochester right now, because I did double check that fee. I'm just kind of looking through this right now. They have the police inspection, they have the certified mechanic, the 24/7 rule, yes. Taxi driver cab minimum, 15 taxi cab minimum in their fleet. But that fee is correct for Rochester.
Do you know how many taxi cab companies they have?
I do not. So, sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
And see, that goes along the line of, I think the one thing that really jumped out at me is the minimum number of cars that you had to be a taxi company. Councilman Karski.
Jim, go back to that one that you just showed with Rochester and how many cabs and so forth. Right there. If we could go across here, you know, just comparing ourselves with this ordinance, what would we look like? We would have a taximeter inspection and seal, so that would no would change to a yes. The inspection would change to a certified mechanic. The 24/7 would still be a no. The taxi driver cab minimum would still be a no, and taxi cab company limit would still be a no. So we probably have less, in my looking at this, stringent requirements than what most of our regional companies are carrying based on kind of the consensus we have so far. Is that what everybody else is seeing?
I don't disagree with that either.
Doesn't answer the question about, you know, fees and licensing costs and that type of thing. I would remain set against changing that.
Okay. Guess we'll leave that as is right now. And is there any other points, Councilor
Well,
Offenbach?
continue, Mr. Chair, because you're the one that brought up this idea of the number of vehicles. Do we need to go down that road a little farther?
Councilor
Because I
Aguilar.
believe we haven't discussed that aspect of it as a committee. Because I would see this, even if we take it forward, I would say that we need to do an informational presentation prior to taking it to a city council meeting with the entire council. So, but I still would like, as much as possible, to come out of this committee as a foundation for what the final ordinance looks like.
Okay. In the discussion, I guess we could start the discussion here. What would you think the minimum number of taxis would be to be a taxi company? Because we were trying to stay away from, I think, the appearance of that we were going after those one-car companies that are out there. And
I'm comfortable with one.
Councilor Offenbach?
See, and I'm not sure that I am, because I think that those one-car companies can be passenger service vehicles who work by appointment on the hours that they want to work. Because it's still my theory, and I think it's being proven out, that the one-car companies, for the most part, are working very specific shifts at very specific locations. And, you know, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I think that if you're going to be a taxi company, you got to meet a little more, you got to be a little more detailed about it.
Councilor Karski?
I agree with you completely. I mean, if you're going to open a business, you're in or you're out, okay? But at that point, what we're putting into this ordinance, we're telling them that they have to have permanent markings on both doors in the back. They have to have the rates prominently displayed. They have to have a taxi meter inside the vehicle. They have to have the rates displayed inside the vehicle. I think you'd be pretty hard put to say that I didn't know that was a taxi, you know, just based on what you would see around town. So to put a minimum cab number, I don't see it.
Councilor Aguilar?
Well, as long as the markings are permanent, but from my understanding, some of them use their vehicles in multiple different ways. We're not talking about, like, are we not talking about if they had a magnetic sign that they put on? Is that considered permanent, or is it not considered permanent?
I would argue that it's not. A magnetic sign is not permanent.
Right. So then, if that's the case, if the vehicle has to have a permanent marking on it, then I could go along with what Councilor Karski is saying, because there would be enough qualifications there that, you know, having to set out a number at this point in time would not be necessary with the other things that we've put into this ordinance.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. With that, I want to give the public a little time also. I know that we've had a good conversation on this. So at this time, I would like to allow public testimony. We are going to allow you to have 5 minutes and 5 minutes only. We're going to be real short on time if we run over that. So I ask you to please keep your comments down to that amount of time period. Sir.
Councilor Rex Rolfing, I just wanted to point out to you, something hit me as you guys were going through this. You took out basically the part of the ordinance that might cause that would require them to be, if they're real taxis, to be 24/7 available, and you switched over to the number of cars. During that conversation, that if they're really a taxi cab company, if they're really doing this, well, if you look at that, Sioux Falls is the only one who doesn't require 24/7, and maybe some more research should be put into that as to why those other cities require 24/7 of their real, if you will, taxi cab companies. Just a thought. Just a thought.
Thank you, sir. Public testimony is now open.
Tom Warner, First Choice Taxi. In regards to the taxi car limits, if the council decided to have, say a 2 or 3 car limit, the 24/7 discussion would probably solve itself, because there's no way that you can pay for 3 cars without running 24 hours a day. But on the flip side of that, if we don't have the opportunity to have those 1-car operators out there, if we call them a passenger service vehicle, we are essentially taking away their livelihood, because the majority of their income as a 1-passenger vehicle is from sitting up at the airport or sitting at the bar while they're establishing and building their business. I started my business as a 1-car operator, and I focused on trying to build that call volume, but without the opportunity to sit somewhere, I would not have been able to do that. You would have to spend tens of thousands of dollars like other companies have had to do, like Driven or the limo companies or things like that. The other concern that I have is on the suspension and revocation side of it, on the enforcement issue, everything seems to be treated as an equal violation. If you get a speeding ticket, you don't get 5 years in jail. Reading this, if I have one of my drivers who's out there acting on my behalf and he takes somebody a long way and overcharges somebody, I could be facing a 90-day revocation or suspension. I think that's extreme. I think that if we had a scaled structure to where if that driver was fined multiple offenses by a company allowing a driver, the company could be fined, something along that lines would be more fair. I see some cause for concern there. And that's all I had.
Any questions? Yeah, I guess I do. On this, where we were talking about the 24/7 or being able to park somewhere. Mm-hmm. You understand the way that this new ordinance is written, you're still not going to be able to go and park somewhere if you're a personal service vehicle, because you're going to have your appointments set up by phone, not by waiting for someone to come out of a building.
Right.
So you're not going to be able to operate as a taxi.
Right. And if you were to put, say, a taxi car limit on there, saying, okay, to be a taxi in this town, you have to have 3 cars. Well, all the one-man operators are now a passenger vehicle. If they're a passenger vehicle, they cannot continue to operate in the way that they operate today, and essentially all of them are gone. And then this town is left without 15 taxis on a Friday, Saturday night. But yet, on the other side of it, does Sioux Falls need 50 taxis running 24 hours a day? Absolutely not. There's not enough business for that.
Okay. Thank you. Any other testimony?
Good evening. Brent Kinsley with Yellow Cab in Sioux Falls. First of all, I like some of the things I've heard, especially with the concerns of making sure that the operators of the taxi operators are held responsible for their tax liabilities. There was some questions as to what, how you could maybe make sure that they are indeed operating. One of the first lines would be on the city application itself to have it when you have more than one vehicle for hire license. That would indicate that you have either an employee or an independent contractor operating that taxi. In my case, all my drivers are employees. I have a work comp endorsement with the city. I have my tax ID number. I'm all legit. If you had a lot of these companies that have more than one driver aren't necessary. At least the licenses that I've seen do not. The insurance endorsement does not list a work comp, even though they have 5 vehicle for hire licenses or 6 or whatever, anything more than one. And I think that if you are in that licensing process, that you should declare whether you're the people that are working for you are either independent contractors or if they are employees. If they're employees, then it's your employee ID number, tax ID number, suffices for all of them. If you say that they are independent contractors, then each one of those drivers should have a South Dakota tax ID number to ensure that they're collecting and paying taxes, which goes back to Councilman Erpenbach's question about how are we going to pay for the regulating this stuff. 2% of the sales tax that I collect goes to the city. Last week it was $7,000 we paid to the state. So 2% of that $7,000 goes to the city of Sioux Falls. So that's not just chicken feed. That's real money. So I don't think that they're burdening companies with extra fees and costs is necessary. Also, I wanted to just touch base real basically, and like I said last time, this is more than a 5-minute conversation, and I think that we should really sit down and have not have a meeting at 4 o'clock and then us sit out there for an hour and a half to wait to come in and talk for 5 minutes about something that it impacts our whole livelihood. And I want to start with the I'm going to skip right past the fuel surcharge because that's a long drawn out thing, but on posting your rates on the back door of the cab, that's redundant. You've already said that you have to have your rates posted inside the taxi. Okay, if you post them on the outside of the taxi, right now I don't charge the maximum rates. All these numbers that have been put in front of you are the maximum. Right now I charge 22 cents a ninth mile, and the max rate is 35 cents a ninth mile. If you went through the charts that have been put before you, it shows the maximum rate for a 10-mile ride in Sioux Falls is $36, and I'm not going to, I haven't done the math because I don't charge that. But I will tell you that in my taxis, if you go 10 miles, it's $26. All right? So there's if you take $10 off that 36, then we're right in the thick of things. We're not that far out of line. Secondly, if you, if you post your rates on the door, that's usually a Mylar sticker, not a magnetic sign, because it wouldn't be permanent. If you wanted to change your rates, because I don't charge the maximum rate that is allowable, and this was because when these ordinance, the last time the ordinance was written, was to foster competition, and that actually the rate was supposed to be the maximum rate was supposed to be $3.50 a mile, but when they wrote it in the drop charge, which is the initial flag drop to get, when you get in a cab, that included, you know, 1/10 of a mile, all right? But then when they wrote the rest of the ordinance, then they put, you know, 35 cents each extra ninth, which, you know, it should actually have been 35 cents a 1/10. You know, you get the first 1/10 mile with the drop charge, and then, but anyway, I didn't even bring that up when it was written because it was more than I charged anyway. Another really important thing, and this has to do with sealing the meters, and I know that in the bigger cities, this is something they do. What would you gonna have is when you if you wanted to change your rates, say for me, I'm charging less than the max, but if you wanted to change your rates, you'd have to, you know, go get it unsealed, have it reset, and then resealed. Also, something that probably nobody ever thought of, but it's daily, day in, day out. As tires wear, the meter changes. The smaller the diameter of the tire, the hotter the meter gets. So anytime that I change tires on a taxi cab, it has to be recalibrated. Anytime that you take a taxi for transmission work, I've been doing it for a long time. You have to recalibrate the taxi meter to make sure that it's in line. Now, I don't really worry too much about. I don't charge anywhere close to the max rate. Now, if you know, with the fuel surcharge being deleted, that could change. But I think that it would be cumbersome on a city and be expensive to every time that I change a tire on, you know, right now I have 24 taxis. They all got 4 tires on them. You do the math. You know, I'd be over there sealing and unsealing them all the time. As far as, you know, tampering with the meters, that don't happen as, you know, yes, I can change them as a business owner. I've got the form. You know, it's a sequence, and it's not that easy. And a surprise. All you'd have to do for that is a surprise inspection. Just say, hey, Mr. Kinsley, I'm going to come over and I want to, you know, a list of your vehicles and pick out one and come on over and look and you know and make sure that it's in the tolerance.
Brent, I'm going to have to cut you off.
I know.
It is worth further discussion.
Yes, I'd really like to, you know, set up something where it's just the taxi companies and this committee. I think it'd be fruitful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Councilor Karski?
Just if I could address the posting of the rates, it doesn't say that the rate posted on the door. I would think what we're posting there is the max rate. As long as you're not charging more than that rate, you're okay. Is that the way you interpret the way this is written?
Well, on, what would it be here? I'm looking at 124005, C, posted schedule. Schedule of these rates shall be conspicuously displayed in the compartment of the taxi cab occupied by the passenger and on the outside right and left rear doors of each taxi cab. Now, that part, I guess when I was reading that, I had a problem with that also, because then that means that has to be displayed on the outside door, which means it has to be painted on. If those rates change, then you've got to change that. If you have the rates already inside the compartment, why do you need them outside the vehicle?
To me, two reasons. One, it's a taxi cab. It just identifies it as a cab, first and foremost. And two, it tells you what the rates are. Everybody's going to have the same rates posted on their door and on that card inside their vehicle.
Not everybody today has the same rates.
No, you can charge less than that. That's just the maximum rate. It just so that when that customer gets in that vehicle, they know the maximum they can be charged. Now, if you have a different rate that you're charging, this doesn't say that you can't charge less than the maximum rate.
So what you're saying is on the outside doors should be posted the maximum rate, not just the rate that the company is.
The way this is written, that's what this says. If you read the whole taxi cab rate 124,005, it says the maximum rates for 7 passengers, and the rate per tenth of a mile. And this says that under C, posted schedule, a schedule of these rates shall be conspicuously displayed in the compartment and on the outside right and left doors. So we're saying they have to post the maximum rates. Now, if they want to charge
less than that,
that's up to them. And until this ordinance is changed, those rates won't change.
Mm-hmm. See, and I agree with Councilor Karski. This is consumer protection. I'm from out of town and walking out of the airport to that taxi that's sitting on the curb. I need to know it's a taxi, and I need to know what's the maximum I'm going to end up spending going 10 miles in this town.
well, I'd like it then to say in that section C, maximum rates, because all I see is rates. So
It does say, that's the first word in that section, the
not
maximum
in
rates.
section C, it isn't. In
If you look
section
at 124,005.
05, posted schedule, a schedule of these rates, not maximum rates.
Go to the previous page.
It doesn't matter. I'm looking at that line right there. It's just that line that's stating where these rates have to be posted. So I'd like it to the continuation to say maximum rates, because just because it says so on one side, as we've been discussing through this, I'd like it to continue to say that.
I understand what you're saying, just for clarification purposes. I'm reading it in the entirety, so that's the way I'm interpreting it, so.
And the problem is, I think, and it needs to be more clear, I think, if you look at subsection E, it talks about overcharging, and it says you can't charge more than the posted schedule or the maximum. So the posted schedule is not necessarily the maximum. So whatever problems that it will cause from the rates being on the outside, if we don't clarify that isn't the rate that they're actually charging, because I think that if you look at subsection E in conjunction with the rest of it, I think that there's a very good argument that what has to be posted on the outside of the vehicle is what you're actually being charged, not the maximum. Because if you look at subsection E, it says you cannot charge at a higher rate of fare than is specified on the posted schedule or allowed under this section, and that would be redundant if the posted schedule is just the maximum rates. So when they're talking about the posted schedule, I think what it is attempting to do, the thing that has to be inside the cab and if required, as this is worded now on the outside, is what their actual rate is, not what the maximum is. And then you cannot be overcharged. You cannot be charged above that.
And if I, as a taxi cab owner, wanted to put a rate that's less than the maximum on the outside of my vehicle or on that card, I could do that. It just cannot exceed this rate, correct?
Well, if whatever rate you put on the outside of your vehicle,
is what you have to charge.
You can't overcharge. You cannot charge beyond that.
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, everybody could have the same rate on the outside of their vehicle, but if I wanted to have a rate that's 5% less, I could post that then, but I just can't charge more than that then.
Correct.
More than the rate that's posted. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
We'll take one more person, please.
Les Pietruszkiewicz, Triboy Taxi. I want to ask about the permanent signage, how this will work, because lately I asked Councilor Karski, and he said, yeah, permanent siding, magnetic sign will be fine. I provide with the same vehicle a few businesses. I also teaching driving education, how to drive. And I have magnetic sign, student drive. So, and I have a pedal for me when I'm sitting with the right side. So the car is equipped for driving education. If I do driving, if I'm not doing driving, I take the pedal out. It's built this way so I can take it out. So passenger not push the pedal, plus the pedal has a block, even if it's installed, can go farther. But at that point, when I have two different businesses with the same car, if I put permanent siding, how this will work? And many cars around the world don't have outside vehicle market the rate. Even in Europe, I'm very often, the cars has rate inside on the dashboard, what's the rate by the meter, showing what's the rate is at that particular car. Why is inside? Outside. Car is marked taxi, was a name and phone number. Passenger from airport, when walking out, he see that is a taxi because it's a sign taxi on top and is a sign taxi on the door. That should be enough qualification that this is a legitimate taxi. Plus is a meter when he sit, and also I can put the rate at the same time by the meter. What's the rate is?
Councilor Offenbach.
Question, sir. We're going to require, whether we end up requiring the rates to be on the doors or not, we're still going to require permanent markings that say this is a taxi cab. What is your, how do you then justify you've got your student driver magnet that goes on a taxi cab car?
Because I use a magnetic sign taxi, and I'm using...
But we're saying, at least part of the conversation today has been that magnetic signs are not permanent, and that we would want them to be painted or one of those plastic wraps like we do on the buses or whatever, but it's going to need to be a permanent marking so it's clear that this is a taxi.
What's the difference between magnetic and painted? Then I have limited now business because I can run two businesses with the same car.
That's
so
my
now
question.
I do this because I can change signage from taxi to the student driver. Mm-hmm. And I have student driver on top of the roof as well.
I guess if you have permanent markings that say taxi on there and you put student driver over the top of them, you'd probably be covering that up.
Yeah, but then if I have a taxi on top, I can put that.
Yeah.
And plus, I do this and cost a lot of money insurance for taxi, and more insurance cost for students to drive. It's very expensive insurance for that. And now I will be without of this business.
I guess if I can comment on this, it's less, right?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, under this ordinance, you would be looked at as more of a personal service vehicle than a taxi because of markings and some of the other things. You are utilizing this not only as a business vehicle, but you're also utilizing this as your personal vehicle too, correct? I think
Yes.
we had that discussion earlier.
Well, yes, and most of the drivers, the taxi, small, they're using the same taxi as a personal vehicle when they're not doing taxi.
See, that's where we are looking at. I mean, these are the type of things that we are looking at, and that's the things that we're struggling, trying to get our arms around, is that, you know, you're trying to be a taxi cab for how many hours a day?
Well, taxi cab is around 8 hours a day. And driving student, when I have a student, then I drive like 2 hours a day for students. I don't do 2 or 3 students a day. I'm doing once at a time, 2 hours a day.
Okay. Any other comments, sir?
Well, also that.
You understand where you're at.
Yeah,
It's-
but also the permanent signage of the rate outside, I don't see any reason why. If that rate is shown by the meter, like most of the taxis around the world, then should be enough. What's the reason put outside?
Well, most
outside
taxi-
they see that is a taxi.
Okay, and also, sir, most taxis, and as we're looking at this region, at the different cities that we have listed here on the board, those cities do require that the taxis have permanent markings on the outside. And that's what we're looking at. So you would have to have a permanent marking on the outside, as Councilor Urfenbach said.
That is most on the windows. I see on the windows from inside, sticker on the windows so you can read from outside.
No, these would be on the doors. I do believe these would be on the doors. So that's something I think is the committee has been pretty set on, that we want to see permanent markings so we can identify who is out there as a taxi and identify that vehicle at all times as a taxi, not just, when the person owning the vehicle wants it to be identified as a taxi.
Okay, what if like Mr. Karski say, put magnetic over the permanent signage?
That would be for your school. I don't think I would have a problem with that for your driving, but your permanent signage would have to identify your vehicle as a taxi. If you decided to put a magnetic sign over the top of that, I don't see where that would be in violation of anything that's in this ordinance. Any agreement on that, Council members?
Taxi sign can be magnetic on top? Because I need to change student driver or taxi. That can be changed, but long as it's on the door.
Nothing in the ordinance says that there has to be a taxi sign on top of the vehicle. It just talks about the permanent markings on the vehicle that identify it as a taxi. If you wanted a sign on the top, a lighted sign on the top, that would be fine, but I don't read anything in here that requires that.
I feel that would be a magnetic, you could do that too, a magnetic taxi light if you wanted to, but it's not required.
Yeah.
The permanent markings would be on the side of the vehicle.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. With the short time we have before the council meeting, I think I'd like to take a motion to adjourn this meeting. Do we have any comments from the committee? Councilman Karski?
Several months, a year into this. I mean, obviously, we're going to be bringing it back next month. I'd really like to see this addressed this spring yet to the full council. Do we have a plan to do that?
Well, I think we've gotten through most of the regulations here. I think it's mostly taking a look at the application, making sure that application covers the requirements that we're going to set forth, making sure that on the application that there is something showing that the driver is either an employee or a contractor. We need if they're a contractor, we should have that tax ID. I think the other requirements are pretty much in place. I would also like to see this get moved forward to a council discussion, and maybe even, at that point, letting the council decide whether we should do maybe another work session or, having meetings with the taxi owners. There has been some concerns expressed, but I think that we've done a really good job here at this point, and that, some of the other things that we have left are more cleanup items. Councilor Urfenbach.
I would agree that we're very close, and I would disagree that we need to have separate meetings with taxi owners. It's very clear that group of folks does not get along, and they disagree on almost every point we talk about. And I think that we have, over this year, heard a lot of testimony from individual taxi drivers, individual business owners, and I think that we've done a great job of that. And then I would remind the committee that there is still public hearings involved when this becomes an ordinance that's on our agenda. We've still got plenty of time for more public input. I agree with Councilor Karski that this needs to move along a little bit more quickly now, that it needs to be, if we're going to pass it, it needs to happen this spring. But that all being said, I'd like to see us look at this in committee one more time, because there continues to be these things that we've asked Jim to add to it. You know, and then maybe we calendar it, maybe the chair would calendar it, you know, so that it goes, maybe we do committee at this time next month and then calendar it for an informational right after that, or within a couple of weeks after that, so it's scheduled already to move as quickly as possible, if committee feels comfortable doing that.
And that's, if I may.
Sure,
and that's
please.
what I was thinking too. We have next month, we had our Public Service Committee meeting, we go over this one last time. If we're going to have the application, I don't know if when you talk about an application, is having that part of the ordinance or just,
That's an
I mean,
administrative
does it need to
thing.
be?
Well, even though that is an administrative function, I think that taking a look at that application and the changes that we have been working on that application are necessary to understand that step, and making sure that that application covers the changes that we're making in this ordinance now, because that application has been pretty generic.
And at the point of the informational meeting, that's probably where that application could be brought to us too.
Yes.
And it wouldn't have to be part, I think we need to clean this up and really nail down what we want this ordinance to say at our next meeting. If there's anything else we need to discuss. And then, like you said, a week later, let's take it to an informational. We have our application. Is Jamie going to be doing that application? Who's going to be doing that application?
I do believe Jamie and
Along
Jim
with the police
David
department?
and the administration has been working on it, on changing that
We'll
application.
be, Jamie and I will be working on that. I know she's already has a good start on revising that application, including the vehicle inspection form. So if you would like, we could do that in an informational or the next Public Services Committee. I guess we're just looking for direction. How do you like us proceed?
I guess I would like to see that at the next Public Services Committee meeting. That, at least that will answer some questions in that part as far as what the application is going to look like. And to make sure that, you know, we have all our bases covered on there. And then the ordinance part, I think there's a couple other questions. You know, the question did come up with an emergency fuel surcharge. You know, we may want to consider that and change that rate. You know, of course, the old one was set at anything over $1, which is, to me, is ridiculous. I think it should be much higher than that. And, you know, as we see gas rates now, my thought was, you know, anything over like $3.70 or something like that, that there might be a surcharge, but that can be discussed at the next meeting also.
Okay.
Any other comments? Motions?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.